The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
6.5 minutes after 8. Good morning once again. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, this morning discussing the future of SAA. The resignation of the Chief Executive Officer, Cesar Mzimela, earlier on this week, and two other senior executives has once more seen a call going up for the state-owned carrier to be privatized. Mzimela's departure came barely 2 weeks after most of the board, including chairwoman Cheryl Carolus, also quit, saying there was a lack of support from the shareholder, the Public Enterprises Department. So, what have we got? The Democratic Alliance earlier on this week calling for the SAA then to be privatized. They're saying the endemic dysfunctional nature of SAA has been a financial burden to the state for far too long. Let's talk about this then. What are your thoughts on this? In fact, I've got one or two emails already that have come through, but keep them coming. gwalax@sabc.co.za, gwalax@sabc.co.za. What do you think about the future of SAA? Where should it be located in our economy, in our nation as such? 34701, that's the SMS line here on the program, 34701, but also we'll take calls a little later on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Let me welcome my guests on the program and start here in studio with me. Peli Sangomo is Policy Advisor to Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister Malusi Gigaba. Peli, a very good morning to you. I thank you for your time.
Good morning, Colin, and good morning to the listeners.
Thanks indeed for coming through. I'm also joined on the line now by Natasha Michael, DA's Shadow Minister of Public Enterprises. Natasha, hello.
Good morning, and good morning to everyone out there.
Thank you indeed for your time this morning. We'll just try and sort out the line there. Natasha, your line is a little it's cranking up a little. We'll sort it out in a minute. But Pelisa, let me start with you. There are these calls now that it's unsustainable to the fiscus to keep on having SAA. Let me just perhaps also set the scene by looking at a column written yesterday by the former DA leader Tony Leon, but also former ambassador to Argentina. He traces the problems back in a couple of years ago. 11 or so years ago, when there was one guy called Coleman Andrews at SAA, who between 1998 and 2001, that's 3 years, pocketed 232 million rand from the grateful and unsuspecting South African taxpayer for 20 months' work as SAA's Chief Executive Officer. He goes on to say, now 11 years and 4 CEOs later, SAA has returned to the fiscus for another 5 billion rand bailout, this time dressed up as a guarantee. David Glisson estimates that since 1997, the taxpayer has stumped up more than 16 billion rand to keep the flag flying. Yesterday's revelation that the airline's balance sheet is far more redder, to the tune of about 1.25 billion rand in losses last year than previously thought, suggests that the ailing airline will revisit soon enough again the government's trough. That's the problem. Contextualize this, and if you contextualize it, you look at the figures, you realize that perhaps there's a need to discuss privatizing SAA. What is the view from government?
Well, I think, thank you, Colin, and good morning to the listeners once more. Mm-hmm. Look, I think the key issue here is that we should not see SAA in isolation as an airline, but we must create a better we must understand that the role of the state-owned enterprises it's not only SAA, but also we have the whole range of them. And I think perhaps we have to understand the objectives much better, because if we do understand the objectives of the role of the state in the economy using the state-owned enterprises, then this argument will not arise. And I think I'll raise some few issues actually to clarify. I think the first key issue is that the SOEs in the economy are the critical instruments to drive industrialization. No country in the world that has ever achieved industrialization without state-owned enterprises, and particularly in the areas that are deemed to be strategic by the state. That's the first thing. I think the second issue, which I'll come to the SA one, and I would really like to the listeners and yourself, Golan, to indulge me a bit,
sure,
is that the second component is that in terms of what you call investment in capital formations, or for example what you call economic infrastructure, is that SOEs are critical, because what they don't only create jobs, because creation of jobs is just right at the tail end. But in fact, fundamentally, the beneficiary of that type of investment is the private sector, because the investment in capital formation is about development of the private sector, because the private sector must start looking at what are the opportunities that are emerging in the value chain of the economic of the investment in economic infrastructure. That's the second issue. I think the third issue that we need to really think about is the fact that industries that require massive capital investment, you still require the state, because it's the state responsibility to ensure that it stimulates growth, but not only growth, but pure economic development, which deals with issues of poverty, unemployment, and social inequality.
Sure, and I think it's and I think a lot of people will understand what you're saying, but you see, there are cost-benefit issues that come up here. If these figures are correct, that between 1997 and now, the state has had to bail out SAA to the tune of 16 billion rand, then does it make sense?
No, the key issue is that once you zoom into numbers, then you're going to truly miss the point. One of the key issue around the role, and I think if you zoom specifically on SAA, SAA, for example, is a national carrier, but amongst the key things that it does is that it follows goods, which is its strategy and its existence. It's linked to the trade policy. So it's dovetailed to the trade policy of South Africa. That's the first thing. The second component is that it's a critical airline for business tourism and as well as the leisure tourism. And unfortunately is that the numbers that are linked to what SAA brings into the economy are not actually articulated by the writers who normally write. That's the first. I think the second issue is that, SAA, like any other airline or like any other state-owned enterprises, does require some form of recapitalization. It does require some form of bailout. It does require some form of guarantee at a particular point, because remember, SOEs, because they operate in a space where there are market forces, they're not going to be immune to that market forces. In fact, one of the key things right now is that the IMF has announced that they've revised the global growth.
Sure.
What it means is that airline is one of the key critical things, because the key issue is it's dependent on investors who would come to South Africa. It's dependent on you, Golan, who decides where do I go and take holiday.
Certainly.
So the reduction of income at household level is linked to the fact that airline industry is going to be bit. But
the problem with
the
SAA,
question, the question is not about privatization, because the key issue is that you must look at is that when any national economy, a global economy is going through a crisis, your alternative is not privatization. You must look at what are the other things. In fact, one of the key issues people never talk about is that SAA has a very good subsidiary which is called South African Airways Technical Services.
That's true. But let's look again in context, because the problem with SAA is that whether there was any economic slowdown or not, it's never been stable, and that's the problem that people are raising. That look at the period from Coleman Andrews up until now, instability right throughout. At what point then do you say this is not sustainable?
Well, I think one of the key things we have to accept is that as well the link between what's happening in SA is linked to what's happening in the economy, but as well as it's linked with what you call policy trajectory.
But the reality is that before 2008, there was stability. Our economy was growing, but there were problems at SAA.
But it was growing at what level? Because remember, anyway, even if it was growing, the growth was actually driven by the consumption sector, really. It was because people were just spending money. So the reality as well, and I think the point when you interrupt me, was there's also a policy trajectory, is that as well you have to push in your airline in a way that it actually captures that. For example, SA for a while has not prioritized Africa, and in fact, in terms of the current statistics, is that Africans are the people who actually travel to South Africa mostly, either for goods, for businesses, or for leisure tourism. And I think one of the key issues that Minister Gigaba has actually been saying in the last 18 months is that we have to reposition SAA, that it as part of its own turnaround strategy, that it's able to capture the market in Africa. But also, and I think the point I'm making is that SAA is linked, or ownership of the airline by the state is linked to trade policy, is linked to business tourism, is linked to travel tourism. So once you isolate those things, then we are going to lose the plot. And I think the intention part of the turnaround strategy will certainly make it sure that it's linked to what are the new markets that are existing for SAA and what are the challenges and how do we reposition themselves. But I think there's also something else that needs to be taken into account, is that SAA currently has 11,000 workers. Now it's in the best interest of the state to keep those jobs, and because we know that
at what cost though? At what cost?
but the cost actually is beneficiary to, because keeping SA is not a social cost. In fact, keeping SA is a social benefit, because if currently SA has 11,000 workers and indirectly it creates 33,000 workers and part of it enterprise development. And I think and that's why I'm saying you can tackle SAA, but you can tackle any other SOEs. And the unfortunate part with everybody else who writes the column is that they're not able to calculate the economic value in terms of the GDP. You combine both the economic development and the social benefits of all the state-owned.
But this is what they are
now,
arguing.
Wait. I have to explain the one of the guarantee. The key issue, we have to isolate a number of things, is that SAA over the time has also not been recapitalized as an airline. The second component is that listeners must understand that when you have the guarantee allows SAA to be able to raise capital in the market. But it doesn't say it's the same thing that any other government shareholders, in fact, in the big private enterprise, do provide guarantees for their own firms to make sure that they remain stable.
The guarantee is based on favorable economic conditions going forward. In other words, if things in terms of oil, for instance, if it gets worse, then the guarantee goes. They won't be able to pay back that money.
No. In fact, that's why, if you actually are aware, I don't know if you've been following it, it's the fact that part of the guarantee, the condition, is that there's a monitoring committee that has been established between Treasury and DPE, which in fact the Minister of Public Enterprise will be chairing and looking at it. And the second component is that they will be developing a turnaround strategy. So the question is truly about saying, what is it that we need to do? Because I think it would be premature for us to even begin today to raise the issue of privatization.
Sure.
In fact, the issue for me is that privatization is a social cost, but I'll talk about it later.
All right, we'll come back to that. But I wanted, just before I go to Natasha again, say to you, is it not possible, and this is what people are arguing when they write these articles, is it not possible to have an efficient SOE at the same time, of course, that is playing a role in the economy, as you say? We need them for the economy, but they must be efficient.
No, SOEs are in fact, to be honest with you, the issue of what you call the soft balance, the soft budget constraints, it's common in businesses. In fact, any business strategies would actually tell you today is that actually what you call a business cycle is that everybody else goes through it. So in essence, SAA is run efficiently because it's not been able, it has not retrenched workers. It's been stable in terms of providing the airline.
Financial losses this year, the financial losses this year, over R1 billion. That surely is not efficient.
Well, if SAA experience a financial loss, it means that there's something wrong in our own economy, because it means that we are not experiencing growth. In fact, if you are aware, Treasury a few months ago, they've revised what you call growth projections. And of course, the indication is that people are no longer traveling anymore, what it means. And of course, there's one exogenous factor that we truly have no control over. Both us as a country and as well as I say, is the issues of fuel prices. We have no control over.
And those fuel prices affect other airlines as well.
Yes, in fact, actually, I like that the fact that you're saying that, because the fuel prices are affecting, and actually other airlines are reinvesting in their own airlines. Singapore Airline is a state-owned enterprise as well. And in fact, you know what? They've not said, we're backing off. Ethiopian Airlines, they're buying Dreamlines, they're investing in the airline. So in essence, you don't say because you have actually hit a dip in terms of the business cycle, then you say, I'm actually going to withdraw from the market because this is the problem. But the key issue is you have to look at the strategic value of what SAA brings to the economy.
Natasha, let's bring you in then. The strategic value of SAA in the economy.
Well, look, I think we have to look at what you were talking about earlier. And look, the fact of the matter is, since 2004, 2005, SAA has received 18 billion rand in state-sponsored bailouts. Now, while I hear the other panelists arguing that, if you look at numbers, of course, they look extreme, I think in South Africa we're forced to look at numbers because we are in an economy and we're in a country where we are forced to look at what 18 billion rand could actually do for millions and millions of South Africans who live in the most abject poverty. I think that the problem arises that we have this exceptionally romantic notion of what an airliner is. And there was a very interesting article in the Business Day yesterday where we were compared to another country's state carrier where they said every time the aeroplane rises, so does the national flag. And I think the time has come for us as South Africans to realize that privatizing or even semi-privatizing, selling off shares in the company to private sector would not mean that we would lose the name SAA, just as in many countries across the world and in the aviation industry across the world, many national carriers have had parts of them privatized or completely privatized and retain the country's name.
But the issue, Natasha, is whether or not it will do what Pelisa says SAA does, which is one, develop routes that are completely underdeveloped that assist us in growing this economy and doing things that that private operators will not be willing to do because there are obviously losses involved?
Look, I think we have to be very realistic and understand that there are trade agreements and there are political agreements which will require our airline to fly to areas that might not be that profitable. But I think one also has to look at present. Why is SAA not profitable? Why are we running at what is estimated to be at a 1.25 billion rand loss this year? Why have some of our strategic routes been cut down while non-strategic routes increased? You know, it takes a lot of passengers on a plane to make a trip viable on an airline. And I think especially in the case that we find ourselves at present, I think we've done a cart before the horse exercise because we haven't seen the new SAA turnaround strategy, and yet we are still giving a 5 billion guarantee for the next bailout. So I think the problem comes in and you mentioned it at the beginning of the show when I in my statement said it's an endemic failure within SAA. I think we've had so many changes in leadership. We've had so many crises in the airline. I think that we really need to sit down, and I don't think that this should be a political issue. I think this should be South Africans coming together for the greater good of our country and looking at the way forward, how we take South African airlines forward, that it's still productive for South Africa, that we still look after our trade interests, our political interests, but also make sure that we are not continuously throwing good money after bad to an airline that clearly is not operational.
Do you want to respond? Do you want to respond, please?
Yes. Now, I mean, you know, I think the issue is that Natasha, I want to be emphatic on is the fact that it's prematurely for us. I don't think we're not saying that SA is not as many trouble, but I think it would be incorrect for you to isolate the issues of SAA with the economic performance. That's the first. And I think the second issue is that our own view is that the issue of economic development is a structural change, and we have to think about what is it that what else that SAA does in the economy, so that we're not actually boxed into the issue of the financing. Yes, of course, we're not saying that we should not be looking at numbers. Part of what we are saying and the Minister Kikebe has been saying that let SAA develop a turnaround strategy. And I think the turnaround strategy will begin to help us to understand exactly how to push in the airlines and what is it that we actually need to do and what are the routes. Because for us, we actually believe that the routes that SAA has been pursuing over time have not been strategic enough to deliver the kind of economic benefits that we actually require.
Is it possible that even people at SAA do not believe in the strategic direction that the Public Enterprises Department has taken? Look at what has happened. Clearly, I'm talking about the resignations of the board, of the CEO.
I don't think that, and I would not. I mean, I don't think that there's an issue about not understanding the shareholders' vision. I think the shareholder has articulated the vision very clear. Was that one? There's a critical role to be played by SAA in the South African economy. To date, SAA contributes about 3,000 jobs only on technicians who are actually maintaining and fixing and repairing aircrafts, and no private sector would have done that. That's the first thing. And then the second issue is the fact that the minister says that we have to explore and look at new routes that in fact are linked to our own trades agreement, and part of it is that it's fundamental in Africa.
But why are people leaving? Why are people resigning? I mean, good CEO Siza Mzimela, everyone agrees she's left. Other executives, board members, everyone just leaving in droves. Why?
Well, I mean, I do think that one of the things you'd recall actually is that leading to the resignation is that we've had a lot of discussion in relation to what where SAA should be going to. That's the first thing. The minister had undertaken a diagnostic analysis of where SA is, and I think currently we're sitting on that report. We're studying it because it will inform the type of strategic direction.
Were you unhappy with the direction by the executives? Yes,
we are. There are certain components that we're unhappy about, and I think there was going to be a point where actually the leadership would have to actually begin to say, Do they understand the new vision? Do they understand the problems and exactly where? And I think in any way, in terms of any other business strategy, you present a business strategy to the current leadership and say, are you aware these are the problems that are existing? And do you think you're going to be able to be part of the new vision? So the key question was that really, probably the CEO and the board actually thought that they were not going to be able to pursue the new vision where the minister
Is it what you thought as well from the department, that they were not, I suppose, competent enough to pursue the new vision?
Well, I think from what you are assessing, and I think we're not making any conclusive decisions on this matter. But the key issue here is that from where we're sitting as a department, what we were saying was that we were saying that things were not going right, and hence we undertaken the diagnostic report, which will inform the turnaround strategy. And I think maybe the leadership thought that they were not going to be able to be part of that turnaround strategy. They did not have ideas in terms of where to take SAA to.
Let's hear from South Africans. A lot of emails, by the way, coming through. gwala@sabc.co.za. Let's go to Paul here in Johannesburg. Paul, where's Paul? Paul is gone. Let's go to Luther in Midrand. Good morning, Luther.
Good morning, Kolani.
Hi, welcome.
Yes, man. My quick comments, man.
Yeah.
DA, the problem with DA is they've got an outcome before the process. I wonder if they're asking the right question. Mm-hmm. Because it's only when you ask the right question that you're going to come with the right solution. The issue here is that privatization benefits a few group of people and continue to cause this catastrophe of social disintegration. And I'll give you an example. In 1999, Telkom had over 60,000 employees. And the same noise was made about bailout and what, and they privatized Telkom. In 2003, Telkom remained with 25,000 employees. Over 35,000 employees were retrenched, creating a catastrophe that we are finding ourselves in. Where is Telkom today? Telkom today is sinking slowly and is dying. And whose responsibility is it when there is unemployment and all these troubles? It's the government's responsibility. Now, the government has got a responsibility to make sure that they can't allow somebody to go and privatize there who are DA people, to go and make a lot of money out of SAA when they're not even protect jobs. For me, I don't think the issue must be about whether we're bailing out. I don't mind. I want to pay tax, and that if that tax must be used to protect jobs, let it be.
Okay.
But for me to say you're a private person who's going to go and retrench people, and those people will be the lowly skilled people, and the lowly skilled people are black people. That can't be right.
All right, Luther.
And we know DA wants to portray this picture that SAA is failing because it's run by black people, therefore not privatize it to white companies. That is wrong.
Okay, Luther in Midrand. Thank you. Let me take some more calls. Then Paul in Johannesburg. Yeah, good morning.
Hi, Kolani.
Hi,
morning. Paul. My comment about why SAA is not profitable is very simple. Mm-hmm. They are ridiculously and arrogantly too expensive. On all the lines in Africa, they are more expensive than the national airlines from that country. And that's why they're not making money out from the African route.
Okay.
That's my comment.
Okay, that's Paul in Johannesburg. Thank you. Gift in Port Elizabeth. Hello.
Hi, Kolani, and hi to your guest.
Yeah.
I like Kolani. First and foremost, I'm one of those people who will be totally against privatization of SOEs. Mm-hmm. I think the reasons for SOEs, Kolani, in fact, to lead to poor performance are just diverse, Kolani. There are, of course, a host of economic reasons ranging from through inappropriate pricing policies, your chronic management problems, and also poor investment decisions. But secondly, another factor is that, for instance, structural adjustments, agreement limitations on public spending sometimes lead governments to run up areas with major public enterprises, contributing to their collapse. And South Africa is not an exception on that. That, to me, privatization. In fact, privatization is not automatic panacea, because this is demonstrated by a research done by Grosh, who undertook a detailed study of public enterprises in Kenya, and she arrived at one of the conclusions that public enterprises are often required to undertake investments or provide services that are motivated by distributional rather than commercial criteria, and this will often depress performance in terms of profit. efficiency and competitiveness. But lastly, the use of overall financial returns give a deceptively negative summary statistic of public enterprise performance. So I'm one of those who will be totally against privatization, because that will not be a panacea.
All right, that's Gift in Port Elizabeth. Let me read one or two SMSs before I go to the news headlines. Somebody says, I will not be surprised to see plane crashes in order to claim insurance and kill people by these Illuminati leaders. Watch out, they sold our souls to the devil. Tandi says, fuel price affects all airlines. SAA is just badly run. I'm glad the CEO resigned. Get a new competent CEO, even if he's a white male. That's according to Tandi. Vuyo Ebai, turnaround wizards have cost us about 200 million rand since 1994. There is also Stay in KZN who says, the problem in our country is that all state-owned entities are so unfortunate to be run by people who do one thing well, and that is to run them at a loss. This link of SAA and economic performance is absurd and ridiculous. Mr. Ngula was there. I suppose Mr. Ngula was there when SAA bled money because of pure incompetence. Stop fooling us, says an SMS. Liz in Durban, the lady talks a great deal. She's not convincing. Privatize the for economic sense. Another one says, the parastatals will continue to bleed CEOs as well as skilled personnel as long as the political leadership is not there or still muddled in intra-party factions, pure in KZN. Right, let's take your news headlines. When we come back, we'll look at more of your SMSs and emails and also take more of your calls. 0891 104 208. 0891 104 208. What to do with SAA is the question that we're discussing this morning, remember. And of course, we'd appreciate your input here.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Well, we're talking about SAA, the resignations over the past couple of weeks, in particular where the board, including the chairperson Cheryl Carolus and other members of the board resigned, followed by the CEO and other executives as well. The question broadly then is what to do with some of the problems that are coming through here. Remember that SAA has been able to secure a guarantee from government of about 5 billion rand, and reports are suggesting that when they table their financials in Parliament, we will hear of 1.25 at least. That's 1.25 billion rand in losses. What are your thoughts then? 0891 104 208. I'll go to the lines. In fact, let me take some calls here because there's is it Seso in Cape Town who's a pilot. Seso, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you for taking the call.
Yeah.
Look, for 30 odd or 35 years flying for that airline, great airline. I'm very proud to have been associated with the airline, now retired. When I was there were these turnaround strategies, and they're talking about another one now. But I noticed that during your discussion now, there's absolutely nothing said about the management of the airline. There are wonderful people who work for that airline, dedicated people who work for that airline, and have made it a great, great airline. It's one of the oldest airlines in the world, and something to be so proud of. And there's no reason why we should not be able to succeed. It certainly did in the past. And so I'm just wondering why you now, particularly, are not harping on the fact that for a company to make money, you need to sell the produce. And the people out there who fly the aeroplanes, work on the aeroplanes, and do those sort of everyday tasks are doing them to the best of their abilities. But there's management out there that's supposed to be selling the airline and supposed to be making sure that the airline gets filled up with great leadership, showing the people in the direction in which they want to go. And so my comment is just that over the years, the people who sit at the top are people that have come in and have very little background on the airline as such, and may have a lot of commercial background or economic background in business and that sort of thing, but running an airline is really different. So
you think that's where the problem is, management?
Undoubtedly. I'm quite sure that if you went to each and every person in the airline and you went to speak to the workers over there, they'd say to you, how is it possible that our people are thinking about this now and this now and this now? We've had all of these strategies. You know what? Whether you privatize the airline or whether you leave it as part of the government has got nothing to do with it. Privatization is not going to make it work unless you have the proper management. And the real thought behind privatization is the idea that we're going to get proper management, because now it would be private and now people would be more responsible. This Mr. Coleman, who was over there, you're saying that he took 230 million away.
Yeah.
Certainly he did. Who allowed him to do that? The board. The board allowed him to do that. He did it legally. Okay. Whether he feathered his own nest or whatever he did is neither here nor there. He did that legally. The management of the airline
and Saki Macozoma was the chairman at the time.
Yes, he certainly was. And so he said, these are the conditions on which I'm going to work. Okay, and I'm not quite sure, I'm not privy to the exact figures, but, he had 10% of whatever happened or something like that. But the point is that the then existing board allowed such a contract to exist between somebody who they were employing and the company. The company had to eventually pay that money. And he did I don't want to say he did a good or a bad job, but the point I'm trying to make is that when he walked away there, he never stole that money.
Yeah, no,
that
you're
money
right.
Came from the airline, and it was allowed and it was vetoed.
Sure.
Not vetoed. It was signed.
There was a contract.
In his contract by the then existing board.
All right, I take your point. Siso in Cape Town, thank you very much. Natasha, let me bring you in because I think this is a very important point, that the issue is not about to privatize or not to privatize, but to ensure that the kind of management that is there is capable, understands the airline industry, understands the difficulties of the aviation industry or faced with the aviation industry globally right this moment. Natasha, are you there? Okay, I've lost Natasha. Do you want to respond on that, Pelisa?
Yes, I do want to respond. Thank you, Kulan. I mean, I think the key issues that the callers are actually raising is the fact that the distributive impact of SAA in the economy is being discounted and no one is really talking about it. I think it's important that we elevate that issue. That's the first thing. I think the second issue, in fact, is the fact that, the minister, when the previous board resigned, what the minister did was to announce a new board. And I think one of the key issues that demonstrates his commitment to ensure that, one, we have the right management who understands the airline. Because if you look, in fact, currently at the current composition of the board, most of them have the background on aviation, they have management, and they're actually committed in ensuring that they're actually taking the airline out of its own woes. We will be sharing with them the diagnostic report that that the minister has actually undertaken to make it show that the turnaround strategy is actually responsive. And I think the points that callers are making in relation to where SAA is coming from, of course, granted, the SAA has gone through business cycles, different changes in leadership, and I think it's some of the things that we've inherited during different times of leadership. But also, there was a point as well that we must accept, that there was no clarity in relation to what would be the policy trajectory in terms of where do you locate SAA and its role, and broadly in terms of the SAA. I think now we have a very clear vision that the state must play a critical role in the economy, and airlines or electricity or logistics or rail remains the strategic and the backbone and the key instruments of driving industrial development in South Africa. So therefore, based on that broad framework, then we have clarity in terms of where we want to put.
I think Natasha is back. Would really like you to respond to the caller, the pilot from Cape Town, who says, let's focus on management. Deal with management. Do they know what they're doing?
Look, I'm sorry I was offline. I didn't hear the caller, but briefly from what you say, I agree 100%. And I have regularly in the portfolio called for more accountability within SAA leadership and SAA management. As you know, aviation is an exceptionally specialized field. And I think that we need to concentrate on making sure that people that we appoint to these critically important positions have the necessary experience and qualification within the aviation industry, because it is so specialized. I also I want to hasten to add that I think that it is critical that we place a great deal of accountability on those people that we place in management positions, because I think all too often it's too easy to simply step down from your position and resign instead of facing the music when things go horrifically wrong. And I specifically refer to the case of the price-fixing scandals, which South African Airways found itself in 2006 and 2007.
Yeah.
We were fined over R1 million for that, which, let's face it, South Africans had to pay. And still, the fine was levied, the monies were paid, and that was that. And I think that we as South Africans have the right to demand that people are held accountable for their actions when we place them in managerial
positions. But just the point that Siso was making is that it doesn't quite matter whether we privatize or leave it as under government. The issue is that we must sort out management, and that there is this idea that if you privatize, then you will get good managers. But actually, it doesn't work like that. As long as we can give SAA, wherever it is at the moment, good managers, and that's it.
Well, absolutely. I think, the point is, at present, there's something systemically wrong with SAA. And one has to look at the management structure that's there and realize that clearly it's not working, and we need to look at the way going forward. I think the difference between the private sector and obviously state-owned enterprises is it would seem in the private sector, if someone does cause something dramatically to go wrong, as what happened in SAA with the price fixing, I think it's widely accepted that those people would have been held fully accountable for their actions and fired.
Okay.
Whereas in a state-owned entity, it seems that it's a slap on the wrist and we simply carry on going forward. And I think that this is something that government, that Parliament, and that as South Africans in general, we need to put a stop to.
Okay.
Because it's simply not good enough.
Pelisa, I hope you're taking note of that particular point, and I'm going to ask you to respond in a while, but let me just read some emails. Kabelo, for instance, says they are leaving because they couldn't emulate profits of Khaya Ngula after they demonized him. In a nutshell, they are all talk. Emirates fuel is heavily subsidized. We cannot compete fairly. That's an email from Kabelo. There's Innocent Siabulela, or France in Neisner, who says, SAA may play in the market space it occupies in the industry, but lost its position as a competitive and profitable enterprise. But it has a huge role to play in its non-financial role for the country. I suggest we treat it as a municipality where it will conform to legislation that governs them, especially in terms of wages, grades, and the rest of its SCM. Cut human capital related costs and change commercial expenditure configure. That's Siabulela France. That's actually an important and interesting point he's making here about human capital related costs, because there were suggestions yesterday, and perhaps you can respond to this, Pelisa, that the CEO currently was earning something in the region of 950,000 rand a month. Is that true?
It's not entirely true.
It's not. If you say not entirely true,
it's not true.
It's not true.
Yes.
But is it anywhere around that figure?
No, not.
Oh, okay, all right. Because I saw it on Twitter and I was like, 950,000 a month?
No, it's an exaggeration.
Okay. All right, let's take some calls. Nick Mazia in Johannesburg. Good morning.
Morning, how are you, Kolani?
I'm very well. Welcome.
Yes, Kolani, my contribution to this will be the gentleman that spoke about management problems in the airline. I think he has spots on. One of the problems that management have been failing to deal with in the airline, for instance, you have the pilots. Pilots that are being used in SAA, majority of them are coming abroad. And their payment is based on the dollar. No matter when they utilize lines to the African continent, where in some of the countries we don't want to use the dollar. Now, the impact is huge financially in the organization. Two, even hotels that they use hotels that they determine, not the management. The pilot themselves determine the hotel in which the company should be paying for them.
Okay.
For instance, they will go to Mozambique, but they will still be paid in a dollar. But in Mozambique, you do not use the dollar, you use something else.
Okay.
So therefore, it has strained the company. And we have raised that with the management to be saying, if you don't deal with this question, you will have a serious problem financially in the organization.
Okay, Nick Mazia of Satao, thank you. Let me quickly hear from Elvis in Pretoria. Elvis?
Well, morning. How are you?
I'm very well, Elvis. Welcome.
Yes, thanks, Polani. I think, first of all, just to emphasize, privatization is not even a way to go. Mm-hmm. But then the deeper problems, I would agree with the two previous callers. Management of this SOEs in general, especially the boards, are failing the country. Because if you look at the composition of the board, most of the people on the boards come from their own companies which are being run successfully. When they come here, they've got other interests where they invest their own looting tendencies here, and their interest is not entirely with the success of the company, but to also enrich themselves, because their companies are very successful. But two, the board composition is not correct. It is not properly regulated. If we had a board where in the composition of the board you had, say, labor, the unions, one, two, you had one of the core workers, like in the SAA, maybe a pilot or a person representing, they would better be suited to also assist the board, because the board are people, they are not necessarily screwed up with the operations, but they are managerial in their approach. And they would tend to look at profit rather than the conditions on the ground. If the people on the ground are not happy and they cannot be properly represented and the operations are not outlined to the board, you'll find that management at all times is misleading the board to attain their own goals. That is where the problem is. They are unregulated.
Elvis in Pretoria, thank you. Patrick in Midrand, hello.
Hello, Tonale.
Hi, welcome.
Yes, I fully concur with the three previous callers that a privatization of SAA will not actually work. But one other point I want to make is that I sometimes feel that our government is apologetic about the correct things that they're supposed to be doing. It is correct to say that private sector will not create jobs in this country. It's only the state. It's everywhere else you go, stable economies like Germany, there's a lot of involvement of government in there. But I sometimes feel that they're so apologetic. Take the issue of that 5 million rand guarantee that was given to SAA. The government is a shareholder of that. Why are they giving guarantee? They must just give the money. It's plain and simple. They are the shareholder. That's why I'm saying that they are apologetic about embarking on things that they're supposed to be doing. That's my contribution.
Yeah, but in other words, you're suggesting that people are talking about 16 billion rand since 1997. You're saying it doesn't matter, just give them.
No, I'm saying what you need to make sure, let us be efficient. It's correct. Management must do their job. But the government must not be apologetic about investing in SAA. Because SAA is playing a seriously big role in actually developing this country.
Okay. Patrick, thank you very much in Midrand. Let me quickly go to Anele in Pretoria. Hello, Anele.
Morning, Tolani.
Hi,
Two quick things,
yeah.
Tolani. We can't dispute the fact that SA is a major economic role player in South Africa, but we equally cannot shy away from the fact that one of the values for the money that government is putting in SAA, that government is looking for, is the ensuring that the management that is at the helm of SAA, they ensure that the airline is commercially viable. We can't continuously dump money to SAA, Tolani, where you are going to have a situation where the year after year, or after every single term that ends of the board or of the CEO, you are unable to trace where are the values of the money where is the value of the money that invested in SAA. I agree with the view that says government can't just open a tap that is uncontrolled for SAA. We must see government putting strict cost-cutting effective measures that are going to ensure that SAA provides us with the necessary value that we must get as taxpayers that are supporting that airline. But also, government must not just be willy-nilly availing that capital to SAA, Polani. But the last issue at the leadership level, Polani, I don't think it's an issue when a board that is accepting that they have failed in the office. I think we must take it as though that Cheryl and her counterparts and her colleagues, they were seeing that they have not done anything in turning around SAA as they were charged with that responsibility. And I think what we must be asking is that the minister now, in the new board, they must be given a new strict mandate to turn things around in SAA, just as the National Treasury did with SADC, to say, we are not going to give you money up until you come with a paper that you have committed that you will turn things around.
Okay,
so
Anele,
giving people money like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Anele. Let's go to Yaj then, my last caller here. Yaj is in Cape Town. Good morning, Yaj.
Morning, Kolani.
Hi, welcome.
I don't think it's a question of privatization versus, state-owned enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
The whole industry is in trouble. As a result of these rising oil prices. So, there are private airlines that have gone bankrupt. One time was in trouble, all of that. Now, what is the turnaround strategy going to be, given that oil prices are going to rise relentlessly, provided economic growth continues? It is a catch-22 situation. The turnaround strategy has to be one of, contraction, looking for smaller aircraft, more efficient aircraft, even cutting down routes. It's not a good story. The glory days of this industry are over.
Which is what, by the way, SAA has been saying in terms of looking for the guarantees, isn't it? Because they say they want to secure a fleet of fuel-efficient planes and so on. Isn't that what they want, Jan?
Well, if that's what they want to do...
No, it is. It is. I know that for a fact. Pelisa?
Yes, thank you. I think from the callers, one of the key consensus issues is the fact that privatization is a source of distributive injustice. I think with the type of social inequality that we have in South Africa, I think it will putting an egg on our face if we pursue that route. I think the second issue, frankly, which one of the caller makes it very clear, is that SAA is actually not subsidized from the fiscus. I think some of these requests for funding, and in fact, it competes with airlines that are heavily funded. That are heavily subsidized by their own fiscus. And it has to survive on its own in a shrewd market. So in essence, it's something that we need to take into account. And I think as a shareholder, it's important that we were keen and open to take that risk. Hence, in fact, part of what the minister has done in appointing the board, part of the strict instruction was to say which routes that are profitable. What are the things that we actually need to do? You're sitting with a diagnostic report and tell us exactly what is it that we need to do to revive the SAA. But I think I want to go back to the point that Natasha makes in relation to the fact that when SOE management actually, as soon as anything else has gone wrong, they get away with that. In terms of our own portfolio, I think we've demonstrated, Minister Kigaba has demonstrated that if the board is actually not incongruent in relation to the vision that he presents, which is about increasing the distributive role of that particular SOE. I think we've been quite exemplary, is that we actually rotate the board. We allow them
quite complex, though, in the South African context. I spoke to ComAir just a short while ago after actually the guarantee was granted, and they're complaining. They're saying, fine, there are certain routes that can be subsidized, so to speak, by the fiscus, but domestic routes can't be because we're competing on the same routes with SAA. So what about the private entities that are competing with SAA on the same route, yet SAA is subsidized for the same domestic routes?
But I think that's a key issue, is that the question is that if they are not subsidized because they're privately owned, obviously their shareholders put capital.
But it's not fair competition then.
No, but their shareholders will put capital in the market so that they can run the business efficiently. For us, and I think the point one of the callers makes is the fact that you have the double objectives of an SOE are always going to be different from a private sector. The type of investment, one, the social objectives are so critical, and SAA has actually been delivering on that effectively, even though they may have been struggling in terms of the commercial. And I think the question, we can count a lot of things amongst those, and I think the issues around skills, the technical skills development. Currently, SAA actually refurbish and maintains ComAir Airlines, for example. They maintain and refurbish Rwandese airline and Air Namibia. And the question that we must really ask is, had the private sector actually been driving this, would have been where we are today.
Okay.
So I do think that there are trade-offs, and of course there are opportunity costs that are related with the state being the shareholder of SA, but also it has to be acceptable that part of us making sure that we run an effective business, but also we want SAA to meet its distributive role, is that we must be able to inject capital.
All right, let me read one or two emails, Natasha, and I'm going to ask you to wrap up. There's Kundi Mayanga who says, I think SAA should be privatized, as the DA has said. I think that's the solution, according to Kundi Manyanga on email. There's also another email from Bafedile Mafulukhele who says SAA is a strategic asset. We will not and should never ever sell this asset. CEOs resign daily in corporate South Africa, but we never call for them to be nationalized. I travel solely on SAA for patriotic reasons. Why don't we call for the correct skills? This is not constructive. SAA is not immune to Brent crude prices. We need to capitalize this airline. Regards. That's Bafedile. Let me read one from Isaac Dikhomu who says, we can all see incompetence in deployees of ANC. Look at our parastatals to see what I'm talking about. Gigaba and his comrades are pushing Zumification into everyone's throats. That's a view from Isaac Dikhomu. Last email before I ask you to comment then, Natasha. The DA wants to throw out the child with the bathwater. State ownership is not the problem. The problem is running the airline profitably. Kinosi Rasekhatla. All right, your responses then, Natasha?
Look, simple. We've asked for a meeting with Minister Gigaba. We would like to sit down as interested parties, as South Africans who have an interest in the airline, to discuss the way forward. We are open for all sorts of solutions. We want to contribute and we want to come up with a constructive solution for South Africa.
Sure.
The
Fantastic.
biggest thing is that South Africans must benefit from SAA, prices must benefit South Africans, and all money that South Africans put into SAA must be accountable, transparent, and South Africans must get bang for their buck.
All right, Pelisa, I'm wrapping up, but you've been talking about this diagnostic report. When are we seeing it, and are we going to be surprised?
You're not going to be surprised in certain elements, but the other elements will surprise. But I think for now, we're allowing the new board to actually ground itself and familiarize themselves with the issues. And part of that is to begin to say, what is the action plan that they need to develop? You'll be able to have access to it. And I think part of that, you'll also be seeing the turnaround strategy, which actually the Treasury and the Department of Public Enterprise and the Minister will be overseeing that.
So it's not what we in the media like to call damning findings.
Not really.
All right. Right, Peli Sankomo, policy advisor to Minister Malusi Gigaba. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Also, I would like to thank Natasha Michael, DA's Shadow Minister of Public Enterprises, for coming through and talking to us. Prizes 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 for coming